call is this is a 3-hour-long workshop, but we'll go over the agenda so that you can yourself decide how much of this you want to stick through and whether you need to dip out or come back for a specific section. You will not offend me if you decide that you've had enough at any point, because I've prepared a lot of material and it gets into the weeds quite a bit in some different aspects, but it's been broken out into 3 basic parts. Part 1 will probably be the longest part because of overall timing and the things that you've put into the survey so far indicate that we should spend the most time on sort of orienting everyone to RStudio Connect from an admin's perspective and covering the basics of the configuration process for RStudio Connect, as well as how to configure Connect the right way for your specific needs. So we'll talk about what that looks like. Part 2 goes a little bit deeper into what the experience of an RStudio Connect admin is like day to day and some of the things, tips, tricks, and tools that admins should be aware of. And then part 3 will be maybe the last hour or half hour of the workshop, and that will cover the RStudio Connect roadmap, some things that we are currently working on, and some things that we plan on making investments in 2022. So if you need to dip out, but you're interested in hearing about things that we will be launching in 2022 and working on, come back for part 3, and that'll be sort of the last hour, 45 minutes of the call here today. All right, we'll take a couple of breaks throughout the workshop, but by and large, this is going to be me going through this deck, doing demos of what configuration looks like and these admin tools that I'll be talking about. If you have any questions along the way, drop them into chat. We'll see if we can get some folks from RStudio who are on the call to answer those, or I'll take breaks throughout the workshop to look over the chat and see what questions have come through. This won't be a traditional admin workshop. Usually when we do these in person, we'll stand up instances for everybody and take you through step by step what a configuration looks like, and you have your own environment to play in and test things out. In this virtual setting, we're going to do it a little bit lighter weight, but I have prepared a training workbook for you to go through some of these exercises that I'll be demoing on your own afterward. So if you're interested in this as a resource and doing any of these exercises, either along with me or later on, that workbook is there for you as well. All right, so the purpose of this training is first and foremost to orient potential RStudio Connect admins and current admins to the purpose of Connect. So when I talk about Connect, I like to make sure, especially when I'm speaking to admins, that they understand what the purpose of Connect is. And to understand the purpose, you should first and foremost look at what is expected from the tool from the publisher perspective. So what are publishers trying to do when they use Connect? Well, the purpose of Connect is to allow a data science team or publishers to be able to control the processes and workflows around their own data science artifacts or their own work. So they use Connect as a platform to publish their own work. They can deploy R or Python content. You have a variety of methods that we'll cover today, including push button from an IDE to a CLI methods to get backed or through the server API. They want control over how that content gets executed. So they will use Connect to publish static content or source-backed code, like the actual code behind a content item so that it can be set up to run on a schedule. And they will want to control the resource allocations for interactive content types like applications and APIs. We'll cover that as well. They're going to want to manage the metadata associated with those content items, as well as access controls. And then finally, they're going to want to control the distribution methods of those content items. So one of the key value drivers behind Connect is that it allows these publishers to take environments where they've built content on their local machines or on a shared server, publish them to Connect, and then share them with other typically non-data science stakeholders throughout the organization. So in order to do that distribution, they want to add viewers and collaborators. They can potentially set up Vanity URLs for that content to be accessed through. And they can even schedule custom emails to be sent potentially on the execution of a report or based on a certain set of success criteria. So those are the basics of RStudio Connect. I think the best way, though, is to show you what some of this looks like rather than talk through a slide deck here. So I'll take you to our demo server for RStudio Connect and show you what some of this looks like. So this is RStudio Connect and what we call the content dashboard. And here you can see a view called the blog view, which shows a little thumbnail image preview against a content item. You can flip over and see sort of a table-based view of content as well. And what I'm actually seeing here is all the content that I have access to see. I'm signed in to RStudio Connect already as myself. I'm an administrator on this account. And everyone who has published all of this content I can see here has either opened it up so that it's visible to anyone who can access it over the public internet, all users who can log in to Connect, or they've specifically granted me access to their content. I can see content that I've published here by clicking over to content that I own, or as an administrator specifically, I can select this third option and see all the server content. So on content I own, these are things that I've published, including just today, the admin workbook that I showed you, which is actually a book down object that I've published to the Connect server and made available to anyone no login required so that you all can access this content item yourself. This demo server is set up in a way such that when we share things, anyone no login required, they're accessible to everyone on the public internet. Typically, you would not set up a server like this because most folks in organizations, especially in the pharma space, need control over who can access the content, and you wouldn't want to expose content, any sort of content, to the public internet in this fashion. But this is a specific server for a specific set of needs. And if you have that need to either put resources out on the public internet or to invite external users not a part of your organization, this could be a way to manage content that goes out in that fashion. Let's look at a different piece of content here. I have one specifically picked out, but let's see. This is an example of some sort of a meta example. So this pulls in links to other content items that I've put on the server. So I have links to various Python apps that I've published to this specific Connect server. And I can adjust the access settings here for this specific content item. And you'll see here that it's currently set to specific users or groups. As a publisher, when you first send something to Connect, this is the default state. it isn't shared any wider than just the publisher. So as I am the publisher on this content item, I'm also defined as the content owner. So I can adjust the sharing settings. I can open it up to everyone who can log into this specific server, or I can keep it locked down and add specific people. So I could say I can add Ryan, I can add Phil, or I can even add a group of people. So I have a solutions engineering group here on the server, and this will add everyone inside of that solutions engineering group to access. If I save, my access settings are adjusted, and now all of these people will have viewer access to the specific asset. So I wanted to add a collaborator. That's another type of specific publisher user that you can add to a content item. So I know that my colleague David is on the call. So I'm going to add him to this document, and by default, it's added him as a viewer, but I can then go in and adjust it to make him a collaborator. And now if I save, he is a collaborator on this specific content item. And what he can now do is basically anything that I can do to this content item as the content owner. So if he wanted to collaborate with me and push a change to this content item, we typically recommend setting up some sort of like Git-based workflow so that we're not, trying to change the same thing in different places. And we are working off of a shared baseline of code essentially. But he now has access to the source versions for the specific content item. And he can see which one is active, potentially roll back to a previous version of the content if we made a change that we didn't like. And you can also download the content bundle for this item. So let's pull up the content bundle. And I'll show you what is in here. So what gets produced with the content bundle is the directory that's used to publish this content item, so the instructions for sending this content to RStudio Connect. And he can use this as a template to push content updates to this same content location. We'll also get to see the manifest JSON file. So this is the set of instructions for exactly what went into the environment that I used to originally develop this content. So here you can see that I used R version 4.02. I pulled packages from Crayon, and this will go through the full set of packages and versions, package version dependencies that I used in the development of the content item. It's also a method of publishing content instructions to Connect. These two files are the actual code. So this is the R Markdown that I use to generate the content. And by clicking on it, automatically opened up my RStudio IDE. And I can see here, this is the actual R Markdown code that went into the generation. So that's the content bundle available through the source versions pane. Other things you might want to do for content like this are to, I showed for the previous content item, I can set a vanity URL for accessing this at a URL that doesn't include this long application GUID or ID. So I could say this is the Python content 2021. And if I save this as the vanity URL, can now open it in a new window. And now I'm using this Vanity URL to access the same content item in this clean, open solo view. Since this is a document or our Markdown document content type, I can schedule it to run or re-execute on a schedule, much like you would use for a cron job. So here I'm scheduling this our Markdown document to re-execute. I can schedule it for down to the minute or up to the year. Daily is nice. Maybe I say I want it to run weekly, every week on Monday. So if I save this, this will now tell Connect to re-execute this specific content item. So rerun the code and display the new output, whatever that is, every Monday at 10:22 a.m. Pacific time. If this had a custom email attached to it, I could send that, or I could just send an email version link to this content item. And I can choose to send this to all collaborators or all viewers, and they'll get that email every Monday at 10:22 a.m. Pacific to let them know they should check this document for any updates. Tags are another really useful feature of RStudio Connect, and we'll talk about them a little bit later as well, but they're specifically relevant to admins because admins are the only users on the server who can set up a tag schema. So publishers themselves can't make edits to what tags are available to them, but they can select tags that are relevant to the content type. So they're a great way for putting some organizational frameworks around content and being able to refine content that's relevant to you. So if I came here, I might, for this specific content item, select that it is a Python content type or relevant to the Python project. And then I could select a hierarchical subclass for this specific Python tag as well. So maybe it's relevant to Jupyter, and then I could save that. And then once I do, back on the content dashboard, if I were to go and select Python and Jupyter, I can see that my content item now appears here under this tag. Finally, for document-specific content, you'll want to be aware that publishers can set environment variables for content, specifically ones that have underlying source code with them. So that includes these documents with source code, applications, and APIs. So any content that has environment variables will be exposed to the process executing your content. If you want to set up an environment variable, you can do so by giving it a value name and a value. So maybe this is, I'll just set up a dummy variable here, dummy, and then the value could be, I don't want this, my value. If you want to see that, you can click this eyeball or hide it. And once you add it, it will stage that here until you click save. So then it will give you a list of all of the environment variables that you have added or changed. And once you click OK, those cannot be seen any longer. You can click these here to edit them, but they will be encrypted. Finally, there is a logs pane where you can see any instance of your document having been rendered. So having these logs here inside the UI are incredibly useful to publishers for when they need to troubleshoot deployments, for when they need to understand if anything goes wrong during deployments. This is the first place to come and look for information about how to resolve your deployment errors. If I re-executed this document, I should get another job here in the logs pane that indicates that this report has been re-executed and gives me output for that job. Here. And yep, now I have a new job with new logs, and they can be downloaded if you need to share them around either with our support team or with if your publisher needs to share them with you. This is a good way to do that. But you can also, as an admin, add yourself to content as long as it's appropriate to do so and access those logs yourself. So how I might do that, let's see, if I come here, remember I am an admin on the server. So if I go to all server content, I can choose, this is a pin. Ryan, I'm going to add myself to your pin here for a second. Hope that's okay. I can come here and add myself as a viewer or collaborator. So let's save. And then I can do whatever I need to do. I can download the source version, or I can access or change any of these things that Ryan could change as the content owner. This action of adding myself as a collaborator to this content item is audited. So we'll go over next and you'll see that audited event. Let me first remove myself as a collaborator. Here are up in the top panel, the sets of tools specifically for admins. As a publisher or viewer, they will not see this tab in the RStudio Connect dashboard pane. But as an admin, you get these tools and you can come over to the audit logs and see exactly which events have been captured here. So you'll see that an action was taken by a user, myself, Kelly O'Brien, assigned Kelly O'Brien as role owner, which is another way of describing a collaborator on a content item, to an app GUID, and then we provide the title for that app. So you see one event here where I added myself, one event where I removed myself. So those events are captured here in case you're in an environment where you need to be highly audited and track who's been able to see what data in what circumstances for even what amount of time. Let me take a pause here and see if I have any questions to answer in the chat. Let's see. Instructor trainings. So there's a question about if or when the RStudio instructor certifications will be available again. I do not know. That's a great question. Maybe one that we could work with Phil on coming up with an answer for. I'm not sure if we have plans to do that virtually or whether we need to wait to be in person together again before we start doing those trainings, but can send that question along to Phil. Let's see, it looks like David answered a question about environment variables, and Ed asks, could you let us know how the manifest file is generated? Yes, let's talk about that really quickly. So I'm going to open up, and that's very big. So here's an application that I have in a RStudio IDE. And what we would expect is for publishers to do the generation of their manifest files, specifically in situations where you either want to do a programmatic deployment or a Git batch deployment of a content item. So traditionally, or like the easiest method for publishing an application or content item to RStudio Connect is to go through and do a push button publish. So here's the running application that's behind this code that I was showing. And push button publishing involves pushing a button and getting a publishing dialog for specific server accounts. So I have a number of server accounts here that I've registered to publish to. Adding a new server account is also driven through the IDE here. So you can go through a series of steps to register a new Connect server, and it'll take a publisher through step by step there. But if you want to publish a specific content item and you already have an account set up, you just have to select that account and give that application a title. And then hit publish. And what this will do is use the RS Connect package to go through and generate those lists of deployment instructions, send them over to Connect. So it's capturing the version of R that I used, the version of all the packages, just like I showed in the source application bundle. So that's method one of doing an application deployment. Oh, I shouldn't have hit publish. Should have stopped so that I could show the manifest generation. The other method is to do a manifest JSON generation. And once I've started the deploy, let's see. Stop. Let's see if I can do these concurrently. I'm not sure. So publishers can also use the RS Connect package to say write manifest. And you need to be inside the directory that contains the application. And then once they are, you can just run write manifest. And this generates this manifest JSON file, which you can then use for other types of deployments. Let's see. So just to complete that story, let's show you what types of deployments use manifest JSON files. So going back out to Connect and the content dashboard. Oh, this is the deployment just finished. So this is the application that I deployed through push button. Now let's deploy that same application through Git back deployment. So this is another method of deployment. So first I needed to have taken this code as well as the manifest file and written it out to some sort of Git source. So I have a GitHub account that I use especially for this. Let's see, where is it? So here is my GitHub repository with that same code. It's this Penguins app. There's a git ignore file. There's an R project file. And within this app directory, there's my app code and my manifest file. So all of that gets committed to Git. Once that's all available, I can take the repository URL, go into RStudio Connect, drop that in to link to a new Git repository. Select a branch. Create a title. This is the Git Penguin that. And then I can run a deployment straight off of a manifest file. So again, here's that same app. Except now it's coming from Git instead of from a push button directory. I can tell because in this info metadata pane, it contains this information. It says the content was generated from Git, gives me a link back to the repository, tells me what branch it's coming from, and the directory within the repository. By default, this gets set up to check for updates or like pull that repository from Connect automatically about every 15 minutes. If I uncheck this box, it will essentially stop pulling for new information, but I can always hit this update now button. Unchecking this box and stopping that polling action sort of defeats the really nice like CD purpose of linking to a repository though. So most people just keep this checked. Question about, okay, does having manifest in the directory overwrite the usual publishing behavior that it writes a manifest on the fly? No, you can do both types of deployment just like I showed. So let's go back to RSconnect. So having this RSconnect directory created by push button deployment and having a manifest JSON file is completely fine. You can have both so that you can do both types of publishing if you wanted to, for whatever reason, to different content locations. What you can't do is flip back and forth for the same content location. So what I mean by that is that once I've established a piece of content on Connect, either through Get Backed or through push button, I can't change that specific content item to be the other type of publishing mechanism. So you'll see that that's why I created two different applications. One is Get Backed, deployed from Git, and one is push button. You see here, it does not say deployed from Git. I can't make a change to that after I've established it. Let's see, does deployment work for authenticated repos? You cannot use an SSH key, but you can set up a personal access token access to a authenticated repo. And there is an exercise in the workbook that will take you through doing that. It is exercise 3.3, and it's how to do Git deployment or configure Git deployment from a private repository. All right, I'm going to, let's see, let's do the rest of these questions real quick. The versions of our packages used to develop a specific app the same in the deployed content. Yes, that they should be based on the matching instructions. Although there could be, in certain scenarios, situations where the packages installed by Packret on Connect differ from the packages you have locally, but it does take a best effort on the Connect side through Packret to pick the same packages, and you can have multiple versions of R tied to those R package libraries, and that's how content for multiple versions of R and packages are sort of isolated on the Connect side, and you can make use of different types of environments and publishing mechanisms. Let's see. can we use RStudio Package Manager as a source for packages and manifestation? Yes. When you are developing and referencing packages from Package Manager and you generate a manifest file, that information gets picked up automatically. Let's see. Yep, and David answered that as well. Cool. All right, so that gets us through some of the basics of what publishers can do on a Connect server. Hopefully that gives you some context for why Connect is a pretty powerful tool for publishers, data scientists within your organization, and the types of things that they'll want to do and consider when sending content and deploying it to Connect. As an admin, you do have a couple of special tools on the server. So you can view the metrics that are underlying the server. You can get quickly at a glance a look at CPU, RAM. You can use this pane to view the number of named users on your server and the number of active Shiny connections. You can also see whether various components or features of Connect are being utilized at a glance. And you can see the currently running processes, as well as which host those processes are running on. These will link back to the content items themselves so that you can go to the logs pane for each content item. I already showed the audit logs, but one thing that you'll want to be aware of is how to manage the tag schema. So like I mentioned before, you're going to want to have a conversation with your publisher users about what types of tags would be most useful to them for organizing content on the server. And this is where you manage tags. So to create a new tag category, you click up here. And so if I wanted to say, I want to create the R and Pharma tag category, and then within the tag category, we have like slides, we have workbook, and we have exercises. All of those can be tags that belong to an organizational category. To delete, just hit the trash can, and then all of those tags will be removed. And if they have any existing associations with content items, they will be removed as well. Another really interesting admin tool available within the dashboard UI here is the scheduled content view. So this is where you can see all of the report type content that's been set up with to re-execute on a schedule, like I showed how to set up. And you can use this to get a sense for whether you have a lot of content getting executed all at once on the server, or whether things are sort of spread out across the day. So for November 1st, going forward throughout the morning, this is the content that we'll have executed, and you can see exactly when something is next scheduled to be executed on the server. The list view gives you slightly different details about each content item. Again, links back to the content item and gives you at a glance the frequency, which you can filter here, and then an exact next scheduled run and whether or not that is set up to send an email. All right. The last bit that I'll mention here real quick is the documentation pane. This will link out to the documentation that's specific to the version of Connect that you currently have available. And so this will update to the specific version of the documentation that gets packaged along with your RStudio Connect version. If you need to quickly get access to any of the documentation here. Things that might be relevant to you specifically are the admin guide, the server API reference, and the release notes. But users might find the user guide specifically useful, and the FAQ. All right, so that was the high-level overview of RStudio Connect. I want to make sure that you know about the different content types that users could potentially be publishing to the Connect server. Connect today supports both R and Python. R is required today. Python is an optional add-on. But if you do put Python on your server, that unblocks a number of new Python-related content types. So there are a couple of different high-level content types and then specific frameworks within those content type hierarchies that you should be aware of. So lots of you in the survey asked about Shiny, and so I'm sure that most of you are aware of Connect can serve Shiny applications as interactive content types. But on the Python side, for application types, we support Dash, Streamlit, and Bokeh. For documents, we support our Markdown and Jupyter notebooks. Both of those can be either static documents or source code backed, which allows them to be scheduled or re-executed. You can also publish static content types like websites, plots, or graphs to RStudio Connect. You can publish pins, which are, let's see, better described on the pins website than possibly I could do. A method of publishing data and models are objects, so they're easy to share across the server and can be referenced in development and in other content items that you publish to Connect, so sources of data. You can publish web APIs. If you have the RStudio Connect standard or enterprise license level. So if you have standard or enterprise, you can publish Plumber APIs, Flask, or Fast API for Python. And new as of this last month's release, you can publish Tableau analytic extensions through a package called Plumber Tableau or Fast API Tableau. Those are covered in the latest blog release for RStudio Connect. To a lesser extent, we support models, but we will probably have a better story for that at RStudio going forward on our roadmap. Let's see. Questions. Does Python deployment have a similar manifest process for ensuring package versions match up? Yes. Python deployments either create a requirements text file for you or will use the requirements text file that you provide. You can do a manifest file generation process if you want to do get back deployment for Python content types through the RStudio Connect Python CLI. Yep, cool. Before we go forward, I just want to make sure that we covered our bases on user roles and content privileges. So for user roles, there are three basic types of users on Connect. There are administrators, which we are talking about today. There are publishers and there are viewers. Publishers can upload new content items. Viewers can see or view those content items. And administrators have all the privileges, but they have to explicitly grant themselves content access. Those actions are audited, and they have special access to the admin tab and certain content settings. So those are the things that I just showed through the admin tab. The certain content settings that I reference here are the run as user. So we can talk about this a little bit further, a little bit later on, but What I didn't cover through the application types is the runtime pane. Run as user is actually on the access pane. And this is the actual user that will be running the content on the server. This function is not available to publishers. It's only available to change as an admin. By default, the run as user is this RStudio Connect user on the server. If you want to specify or set up an alternative user for whatever reason that you need to, be it data access or something like that, you can do so and then make that available on an application by application basis by adjusting this toggle here. All right, content privileges we covered also. So there are content collaborators, which I showed. As a content owner, I can add a collaborator, or as an admin, I can add myself as a collaborator to a content item. And those collaborators can publish new versions of the content. They can manage all the same settings, and they can download the source bundles or application code like I showed. Content viewers can only see and interact with the content itself. So it's a little bit confusing that we have the concept of a content viewer and the concept of a viewer role, both sharing that name viewer. But as a content viewer, that is just a content privilege setting. And viewers of content items can be admins, publishers, or viewers. All right, I think I went through most of this RStudio Connect overview demo already. Let me check this. I think I hit everything that I wanted to talk about here in the overview. So let's move on to configuration basics.
Ask a question or go off of mute. You're welcome to do that now. If not, we'll go ahead and move to the next part here. All right, don't see anything coming in, so I think it's back to you.
All right, I'm moving at a snail's pace. I've got like 60 slides to get through, and we're almost an hour in already. So let's see how far we can get through all of this. But I'll try to at least hold to my promise that about 45 minutes from the end, we'll switch over and we'll talk about the roadmap and what's coming next. But let's do links to the codes and RStudio Cloud. I'll let somebody else ask about what links you want there. Okay. Configuration basics. Let's go over it. Starting with supported Linux distributions. RStudio Connect must run on a Linux server of some sort. You can choose from the following supported distributions. You'll note that for Red Hat Linux 8, we support distributions that claim they are binary compatible. So we technically support Rocky Linux and Alma Linux as well as alternatives to RHEL 8. CentOS Stream is not supported. Going to the reference architectures, we support a number of different architectures, and the way to get started thinking and talking about how to set up your Connect server is likely going to be through a conversation with someone on our sales team. So the way you come into learning about RStudio Connect as part of the sales process will involve an architecture discussion with someone on our team here. And they can take you through what is involved in setting up all of the components of the reference architecture, as well as explaining the trade-offs and going over what your specific needs and requirements are. So these are very basic reference architectures that we provide just to give you a sense for how to start thinking about RStudio Connect. Essentially, in a single server reference architecture environment, you have a number of users accessing RStudio Connect through their individual browsers, and you have a Linux server that's serving up any number of content item types. In a clustered architecture environment, you have a load balancer sitting between the users and your Linux servers. And you have RStudio Connect having access to shared storage and a Postgres database. We do have support for Connect running in Docker, and there are some specific requirements and things that you should know about setting up RStudio products in general in Docker containers. I won't go through those in detail here, but you can read through the information that we have available and access our RStudio Docker products here, which will give you access to our RStudio Pro product Docker images, and those can be used for any of your installation purposes. I know based on the early workshop survey results that I read through this morning, it looked like there are a number of you who do not currently have RStudio Connect, or sort of thinking about getting it at some point in this next year, and want to learn more about just what the process for that looks like and how to start an evaluation of RStudio Connect. I'll note that if you are a publisher or a data science leader, you might be interested in this RStudio hosted evaluation, which you can request through a meeting with our sales team. This method of evaluating RStudio Connect is not very useful to admins because you do not get any access to any of the tools or configurations methods that I'm going to go through that'll help you just decide exactly how you want to set up your own server. What is very useful to admins, but you have to set up yourself, is the 45-day evaluation key. So this link will take you to a method for standing up a RStudio Connect evaluation and installing it yourself. And what I'm going to go through next is showing you exactly how you might do that. It is do it yourself, but it is pretty cool and easy and fun. So we're going to do that together here. I'm going to demo it on the call, configuration from scratch, and then hopefully you'll feel more confident in being able to do it yourself. All right, let's get set up for that. I'm going to close down some of these things. And we'll get started. All right, so what I have here is an Amazon EC2 instance. It's pretty small, lightweight for evaluation purposes that I've set up just for the workshop today. It's running Ubuntu 20, and yeah, like I said, pretty small. I'm just gonna show you what it looks like to configure it and publish a couple of things, and then we'll talk about changes to the configuration that you might be interested in doing. So from this download commercial page, this will get you the installation script for the latest version of RStudio Connect, and you can just I'll become root and there. And I'm going to just run the command to download the installer and then execute it. So this should work across all of the supported distributions. And it's going to install some prerequisites necessary for running RStudio Connect. And then it will kick off an invitation to start up the setup assistant, which will help me go through initial configuration steps. Let's see if I can do this though. Usually runs pretty quickly. Let's see, let it think here for a minute. And yep, there we go. All right. So it's officially technically installed now. But if you want to take the step of running through the setup assistant to do an initial configuration, you can select yes, and then it will instruct you to go and access the setup assistant. So I know that I need to get the public address of my instance. Hold on one second. Let me copy that over. All right. I'll open that up and it's going to be available at port 13939. All right, so this is the RStudio Connect Setup Assistant. If you are trying to set up an evaluation like I'm showing here, just select the option to do an online evaluation. If you happen to be in any of these other scenarios, it'll walk you through a situation where you can do an offline license key or an offline evaluation, or you can submit the evaluation or not about the actual license key from your sales group. The first thing that you need to configure on RStudio Connect is the version or versions of R that you want to start with. So this will actually install them for you. So you can select one or more versions of R here. I'll just start with 1 and go from there. So while that's kicking off installation, I can also add an R package repository here. If you don't know what package repository you want to start out with, that's okay. But I will use the RStudio Package Manager public repository. So that's not the field here. That, I don't know, I need to say cran equals. And that will fill in the section of the configuration file for an integration with Package Manager or your internal package repository. If you want to use Python on your server, you can set that up. It looks very similar to how we did the selection for the Python or the R binaries. I'll skip that for now since it's an optional step. And then it is highly recommended that you go ahead and install the recommended system dependencies for typical or the standard set of R packages. So I'm just going to go ahead and install those now. You can see exactly what will be installed. If you want to do this step yourself, you can copy it, you can remove things that you're not interested in installing, and you can take that and do it on the server yourself as a post-installation or configuration step. The next step is to set up your actual web server. For evaluation purposes, I'm gonna sort of cheat here and make this fairly insecure web server. Just open it up on port 3939. Highly recommended that you go through the process of setting HTTPS. The next step is to choose your authentication method. Now, this is your authentication provider, and this is kind of important to get right. When you're just doing an evaluation, it's okay if you want to start out with the built-in method for password authentication. But if you actually intend to keep this server around and you intend to have publishers publish content to it, doing an authentication provider migration after content has already been published and users have already been provisioned can be a bit of a headache. So you want to make sure that you're making that decision consciously. We put together a little bit of a decision-making matrix for going through and deciding what authentication provider type you might want. Sometimes, like, you'll know right away, lots of organizations just have LDAP or Active Directory, and they know like that's what they're going to be using, so they set that up. But there are a number of different factors that might go into making that decision one way or the other. When it comes to needing user self-registration, this is not a typical use case, but for maybe consultancies that have a server that's accessible to a wider audience, more open, potentially outside of your organization, password authentication can be an interesting way of implementing self-registration. Again, this is really atypical, not common for our customers. All of the authentication methods have different availability across groups management. So whether you have groups that need to be defined locally to the Connect server, or whether they can come from the external authentication provider, that could be a deciding factor in what type of authentication you decide to go with. And finally, one of the more important decisions here that requires customers to choose PAM authentication over any other type is whether or not you need current user execution. Again, this is less common of a configuration type across Connect servers, but current user execution, which I've defined in more detail in the workbook, is something that you'll need to choose PAM for. So if we go back to the setup assistant, I'm just going to go ahead for evaluation purposes to go through password auth, which is built in, doesn't require any further configuration. But if you wanted to set up something like LDAP, you can do that. All of the fields are defined that are required here. And then on the next page, it will verify that you can log in through the authentication method you've set up. So similar SAML, LDAP, OAuth or OpenID Connect, those are all things that you can fill out the expected fields ahead of time and use this tool to verify that you've done that correctly. I will skip setting up a private Git repository credentials for this purposes of going through here now. But I will go ahead and set up a mail server. So this is kind of important for evaluation purposes even, is to have the availability of an email server so that your publisher users can test out that email distribution functionality. So a really free, easy to use, safe email testing server that I like, but is in no way affiliated with RStudio, is called Mailtrap. So I'm going to set up a Mailtrap server for my evaluation here. So I have all of my information. This is what it looks like. And to get all of this information that I'm going to be putting into the tool, you just click this drop down, show credentials. I'm gonna go ahead and fill out all of that, and then I will show you what it looks like. So pull this back over here so I can see it. The port will be 587. Sender email, I'll just put in my own for now. And then this server requires a username and password. So I'm going to set that up off screen so that you can't see it. And by dropping in the password, the setup tool will encrypt it for you in the configuration file automatically. All right. The last two bits of the setup tool configuration here are choosing the location on disk where you want RStudio Connect to store its files. These are the default locations. You don't need to change them, especially for evaluation. And then the database. We recommend going with Postgres for production Connect deployments, but again, for the purposes of evaluation, we'll stay with SQL, which ships with the product. All right, so step 2 is what I was mentioning in the authentication section. This is where it will go through and test your authentication method. So it'll prompt you to authenticate at this stage if you selected anything other than PAM or password off. But since I have password off here, it just says my validation is successful. And then at this stage, I can see exactly what this tool put into my configuration file. So you'll see that here's where I set up the email configuration settings. My username and my password was encrypted. And I can copy all of this out to my clipboard if I want to save this for my records for whatever reason. But this will be what the Connect configuration file looks like on the server itself. So when I hit deploy, this will get applied to the server. And then I can log in to Connect. Oh no, did I misconfigure? Here we go. Cool. So now I can log into Connect and oops, not log in. I want to sign up as the first admin user. RStudio admin, RStudio admin. Password. Great. So the first person to register on the server to sign up will be the first RStudio admin. Anybody after that who registers will get the default user role, and you'd be able to upgrade them to a different type of user if you'd like, including you can create multiple admins. So if my colleague David were coming here and self-register on the server, I could promote him to be an admin as well. But that's it. This is now a fully functional RStudio Connect server. One of the first things that I would recommend that you do with an evaluation server is to test the email. Since we set this up, we can use this. Again, I went to admin and then mail settings. And I can use this button to send a test email. And then on my MailChimp server, I now have a new email. So this is a test of RStudio Connect's email sending configuration, and it's working. So my admin account, I registered as Kelly at RStudio, and then the from email address I set as kelly.o'brien@rstudio.com. All right. The other thing that you'll want to do is to see if you can publish successfully. So if you have access to some content that has a manifest registered on a Git repo, like I showed already, this is a really quick and easy way to test the publication of an application. And this initial publication will take much longer than you saw it taking for the other server that I showed, which was our sales demo server. This is because you have to take time to set up that package cache initially for each version of R on a fresh server. So this will take a couple minutes, but each subsequent deployment, as it uses parts of that existing package cache that I'm building right now, will take less and less time. So it's nice to do a little bit of pre-deployment of content onto a server if you have access to content built under different versions of R that you've set up on the server, just to sort of like pre-build that cache a little bit. Let's see, while that's running, what else can we do? Let's do a little bit of post configuration. So let's come back out here and look at the configuration file we actually created. So we were able to access the setup assistant, so it dumps me back out into my server. So if I wanted to view the actual configuration file itself, that's available at Etsy, RStudio Connect, and the file itself is RStudio Connect.gcfg, which is a Go configuration file. So this shows everything that the setup tool spit out that I could have copied to my records as well. But here we can view the actual configuration file that Connect is using on the server. So you'll notice that one annoying thing about when you set up an evaluation that is insecure is that if I refresh the server, it's going to continually warn me that I'm using an insecure HTTP connection. So let's say that I get tired of seeing that warning and I want to do something to remove that banner entirely. Like I already know that it's insecure, so it's okay, you can stop warning me about it. This is not recommended, but I should show you this as an activity for editing the configuration file. So use the editor of your choice on the server to access and pull up an editor tool for the configuration file. So let's see, RStudio Connect, RStudio Connect.cfg. So pull open BI and go into editing mode, go down to the HTTP section, and then I can add this configuration, which is called no warning. Set that to true. Save that out. And then what I want to do to pick up on that change is to restart the Connect service. So system ctl restart RStudio Connect. So if that ran correctly, and we can check it by looking at the status of the service. I need to type. It's active and running, so everything's green. So it looks like I edited the configuration file correctly and restarted the server. So now if I go and look at Connect again, yeah, I don't have that warning message popping up anymore. Here you can see that the content item that we published correctly. Yay, it's available now. And I am the owner of it. So that's the basics of Connect configuration with the setup assistant. Let's see if we have any questions here. Happy to take any questions if you want to go off mute and ask anything.
I don't think the chat box will be seen, but if you want to go off mute, you can do that as well. Not seeing anything else come in, Kelly, so maybe go. Yep. Oh, there he is.
Yeah, I just found the unmute button. So I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Kelly, for so with Shiny Server Pro, we're currently using Apache HTTPD for our proxy server. Is it similar with RSC that we use a separate proxy server, and then set up the proxy to use HTTP from proxy to RSC, and then the connections out to the users would be over HTTPS?
Yeah, absolutely. And the architecture call that you can go over with our solutions engineering team will cover those networking issues as part of the architecture diagram. They can actually help you build out what that will look like for Connect.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Actually, yeah, one more quick. I had a question earlier about co-locating the database, which would be PostgreSQL, it sounds like, with RSC. Just to be clear, those should be on their separate servers, so a database on one server, RSC on a separate server, or co-located on their own?
That's typically what we recommend.
Okay, all right, sounds good.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we've made it through an initial configuration of RStudio Connect. And now the question is, what is next? How do you get from this basic configuration to what publishers actually want and need to be successful? And the key to this, of course, is to have a discussion with your publishers. This is a really important part of being a Connect admin, is to have some sort of open dialogue with your publisher users to make sure that you know what they want to accomplish on the server. And also on the flip side, they know what your organizational policies and expectations are for what they can do. Remember that Connect is a tool for publishers, data scientists to be able to, under certain conditions, own their own work. So we want to be able to let them do that to the most open and available sets of permissions that you are comfortable giving them, while also sanctioning their usage of the server in those capacities. So the best way to make sure that that's happening in a way that you, the IT user, is comfortable with, is to have really open and honest discussions about what they'll be doing on the server. The first step there is to know who your publishers are and make sure you've defined that group. You know who is coming to the server and who those publishers will be. Make sure that they know who you are. Make sure that you know what types of content they'll be publishing. Do they need different versions of R? Are they going to be publishing any Python content? What versions of Python do they need on the server? Do you know how they plan to connect to data sources? All of these are the really important foundational questions to ask that will determine how you configure your server for them. Other types of publisher discussion topics you may want to cover are content access restrictions. Do you plan to place limits on the allowed types of viewership? Remember that on RStudio Connect, there are different types of viewership levels. So somebody can start out with only allowing specific users or groups. They can open it up to all the users on the server who are able to log in, or they could potentially even open it up to everyone who can access the server behind whatever firewall restrictions you put up without logging in. So if you wanted to remove some of these options for publishers, you could do that by setting the most permissive access type. In this case, a value of ACL would take it down so that publishers are only able to open up content to specific users or groups. If you open it up to logged in, then they get that next level, and then all is the default, and that's all 3 levels are open. If you do change that most permissive access type for publishers, it's generally a good idea to set most permissive access type for admin to the level above that, or to all, so that you have all available access types that you can use to set for an application. But the publishers know that they need to escalate an action to you to take that action to open up a piece of content to a more open viewership level. So those are the 2 types of configurations you have around application or general content authorization levels. You will want to have a conversation about whether or not publishers can set vanity URLs for content items. So again, the vanity URL is that content URL they can set in the access pane. By default, publishers cannot set their own content URLs here. Only admins can do that. If you want to allow publishers that capability, which is a really nice one to have, you simply have to go into the configuration file and set authorization for publishers can manage vanities to true. So once you open that up, letting them know that you've done that, or having a conversation about whether or not they need that capability is an important one to have ahead of configuring the server. Finally, like I mentioned before, setting that tag schema for content organization is also really useful and is something that only admins can do. So having that conversation with your publishers about what tags they need on the server is especially useful as they add more and more content. When I'm in a scenario where I just have, 5, 10 pieces of content and I can see them all on the front page of the dashboard in a list, that's fine. But once I get to the scenario like our sales demo server, where we have thousands and thousands of pieces of content, having the ability to go through and have a tag schema for quickly getting access to all of the types of content that I want to see for a specific sales demo that I want to do is really useful, and would be really hard to use the server if I didn't have that ability. So those are tags. A big question that we get, before I move on from that, I wanted to mention that this first section of the workbook goes through even more types of conversations that you might want to have with the publisher users, kind of like a checklist for going through all of the decision points that you might want to discuss. So all of that is in the workbook. If you don't know how to set up one of these conversations with your publishers, or you prefer that the RStudio sales and customer success team help you coordinate doing that, we would be more than happy to do so. Like, that's what we're here to do. That's what customer success at RStudio is all about. So making sure that the publishers and the end users have access to all of the things on the server in the way that will make them most successful, and from your perspective, that you are happy with the level of control and auditing that you have on the server as well. So that's what those teams are there to do, and we would strongly encourage you to reach out to us if you need help with any of that. But this is a list to get you started. And at a bare minimum, I would love it if you are a new admin or a current RStudio admin, if you read through this list and thought about whether your publishers can do some of these things and whether you need to have a conversation about how to make them successful on the server. All right, so a common question we get when it comes to configuring RStudio Connect installations is, what type of resources do these require? How do we budget for it? How do we make decisions around that? The hard answer on this is that what we can provide you as far as recommendations are really only guidelines. Why isn't this showing up? There's a table here. I don't know why it's not loading in Google Slides, but I can pull it up. RStudio. Let's see. It's not this one. All right, I'll find the link to the resource here. See if I can pull it in separately again. No, I will mess with it. I'll fix this slide. Oh, it's in the deck here. Here. This is why it's important to have backups. Here we go. Perfect. All right, so for Connect, we have sort of like a minimum set of recommendations for resource requirements and then like the more recommended set. But this is, like we mentioned, highly variable on what your publishers are actually putting onto the server themselves. So these are sort of basic guidelines, but things can vary drastically based on how much content, what types of content, what they're doing on the server, etc. So here are some things to consider that will have an impact on the types of the size of the resources that you'll need on your server itself. When it comes to applications, it's important to remember that R is single threaded. And so for the most part, applications are going to need to be scaled by increasing the number of processes based on the number of connections per process that are sort of ideal for the type of user experience that the application developer wants to provide. They can do this by adjusting the application scaling settings in the runtime pane. So I have here, this is the sales server. Let's go back here. Okay. So this is my application on my evaluation server. And when I adjust the runtime settings, I can set the maximum number of processes and the maximum connections per process to in this pane here. So if I want to add more resources to this application, I can increase the number of maximum processes that I have available. And the connections indicate a connection from a user opening this application in a browser and interacting with it. So if I have 5 R processes that can serve 20 connections each, I can serve up to 100 connections to this application. If I had a scenario where this application took a long time to start up that initial process, I might want to sort of keep it warm by having one process always available. Now this significantly changes things on the server because it's asking the server to keep one R process always available for this application in the background in case any new connections come to the application when there had been none. So if you have are users or application owners that are jacking this up to make sure that they can always have, a lot of resources available behind their applications. And you might get into a scenario where you have like more resources than you feel comfortable allocating for individual applications. And if you're in that scenario where you feel like publishers are sort of making this a problem, you can use the following configuration settings to cap that number of minimum processes. So you can use minimum process limit to say, well, I only want publishers to at most set 1 or 2 minimum processes for those really important applications. And the flip side is that you can set the maximum processes limit to be capped as well. So this helps you keep a little bit of control over the resource allocation that publishers or content owners are able to apply to their own applications on the server. For application timeouts, the scheduler init timeout is the maximum amount of time that the server is going to wait for an application to start. So if you have a resource-intensive application that needs more time, this might need to be increased. The minimum time to keep a worker process alive after it goes idle is 5 seconds. So in a scenario where you might want to have a process that, again, is really resource intensive to start up, you could increase that idle timeout setting to keep processes alive for longer periods of time in case a connection comes back or somebody, a user establishes a new connection and you don't want to pay the cost of that resource intensive startup again. You could potentially keep that idle timeout for application processes alive for 30 minutes or an hour or even overnight. Again, all of those decisions will affect the total amount of resource budgeting that you need to take into account when you're setting up your Connect server. While we're talking about different types of processes, let's talk about scheduled reports. So report concurrency is another setting that you have available on Connect. You can adjust schedule concurrency based on your needs. The default is that the maximum number of scheduled reports that ever run in parallel on the server is 2. Setting that schedule concurrency to 0 will disable scheduled execution of reports altogether. But you can bump that up to a higher level of schedule concurrency if you have more resources available, or you can take it down to just 1 if you only ever want 1 report running at any given time. So that's some throttling capabilities for you there. But again, with the default set at 2, even if all of your publishers schedule all their reports to run at midnight, Connect will just iterate through them as quickly as it can. It won't try to run them all concurrently. When we're talking about disk usage management, here are the things that Connect stores on disk. This tends to be fairly lightweight for the most part. It will keep compressed bundles, content bundles that have been uploaded from users on disk. There are unzipped bundles for running the content and applications, 1 per active piece of content. There is the package cache. So for the case of R, there's 1 version of each package specific to the version of R. There are the metrics, so RAM and CPU usage information. and that again is surfaced in the admin panel on the dashboard. And then there's some process information and logs for both R and Python. If you want to throttle the number of bundles that are retained for each content item, so again, a bundle is represented by the source versions of an application. As I deploy new updates to this application, I get new content bundles that are kept here. By default, Connect keeps all of them. So the default is 0, Connect retains all of those bundles. If you don't want that to happen, you can change that retention limit to be a different number to reduce the amount of information you're storing on your server. But again, if you're in a highly audited environment, keep that in mind as well. If you experience problems with publishers creating really large bundles, we recommend first having a frank conversation about whether that is because they've been packaging large data sets along with their R code or Python code. If they have been putting their big data sets in with their content bundles and they've been updating that piece of content over and over again, you're getting replicated copies of those data on your server. So we recommend having a conversation about how to put that data elsewhere or to put it in a database and access that data in the application through other means. Let's see. Process information is also has retention policies, and you should choose to adjust the number of job information that's preserved on disk based on how your Connect server is audited if you're in an audited environment. By default, the number of jobs or process information on a per application basis defaults to 1,000 records for an application at any given time, or 30 days of past application records. So once either of those conditions are violated, Connect will start to clean up those process records. The questions at this point? One from Ed. Do you have any recommendations for pack-rat external entries in the RS Connect config file? So using external packages or private packages, Ed? Large packages. Example. Java. Oh, I'm not sure. David, do you have?
So
do we have
I
any
know
recommendations for that? Yeah.
I know that one of the things we use to document an example of why you might want to install an external package is if I think we use RJava as an example because, for example, like installing Oracle, or if you're working against an Oracle database, that can be a little bit annoying. But as a general matter, like you shouldn't. I would say that packages like RJava or RCPP, they're all kind of by default installable through standard process. So external packages is really going to be best reserved for cases where you're really not able to get the package installed on the server in some other way. So if you have a private package and no ability to make it available to the Connect server through something like RStudio Package Manager, then you're probably in a case where you want to look at the external package. But I would say for most uses of something like RJava or RCPP, lots of things depend on RCPP, and we can install them just fine through the standard pathway.
Cool. Hope that helps. Let's see. All right. All of my images have started to disappear. All right, here we go. Just needed a refresh. The next section talks about how to deploy content to Connect and the options that you have and your publishers have when putting content on Connect. There are 3 basic methods of publishing to Connect, 3 different levels of sophistication, I'd say. We've shown 2 of them already. The third is API-backed publishing, or publishing through the Connect server API. So the first 2, push button, users are manually deploying content by hitting that button either in the RStudio IDE or the Jupyter Notebooks publishing interface. The middle one is that Git-packed publishing method I've been showing, where Connect polls for changes on the repository. The third is that server-based API publishing. So at the far end, the right end of the spectrum, you would be helping to set up like a very customized workflow for someone to publish through the API, either taking an action again off of maybe like a Git repository push, or putting together some sort of deployment pipeline that's highly customized in Jenkins or GitHub Actions or Azure DevOps. I'm sure there are lots of other methods that you could use to customize deployment pipelines, but those are sort of the 3 that we see really commonly used with Connect. And in the second section of this presentation, we have some examples for how to get up and running with those. I don't think I'll get to the point, because we're running out of time here, to demo some of that. But I have linked to like the step-by-step how-to guides we've written for setting some of that up. But this is relevant because you're going to want to have that discussion with your publishers to understand how they intend to put content onto Connect. You may be in a highly audited environment and scenario where you need to tell them that you are going to handle the publishing for them through those customized deployment pipelines, or you have to have a conversation about, yes, it's okay to push button publish. Yes, we want to be Git-backed publishing in certain scenarios or in all scenarios. This is relevant because you may want to establish some sort of code promotion strategy. So in the world of RStudio team products, we think of dev, test, and prod involving a couple different RStudio products. This workshop is specific to Connect, but in development, we think of that happening either in RStudio Workbench or like RStudio Desktop or in RStudio IDE, or any Python IDE whatsoever in either Workbench or on someone's local machine. So development happens outside of RStudio Connect. And what the publisher wants to do is capture that environment, it's just the code and the packages, and send that over to Connect in some capacity. So depending on what you're using Connect for, you might just have a single Connect server where everyone publishes to and they adjust their access settings to make things available once they're happy with them. Or you might have something more structured, like a test server where some sort of user acceptance happens and you have a level of integrated testing perhaps. And then you move from there to another Connect server or another content location on the same server, which you've designated as like production. So that's the level where you're then doing the access permissions changes, you're establishing what kind of resources you want backing the application, you're setting up your scheduling, and how often you want that code to execute. So each of the publishing methods at each level of sophistication can be used for this process of moving something from dev to test to prod. Moving something from test to prod typically involves setting up 2 different content locations on the server. So here's what I am talking about when I say that. So right now I have Git back deployed this application, and it's coming from a Git repository and the main branch and a directory. So this is what I would establish as the production version of my application in this single server scenario. So if I wanted to add a development or test location for this application, I could set that up based off of another branch coming from the Git repository. So let's see, I have this application. Here's my application code. And as a publisher now, let's start the terminal over. Let's start the whole session over. Why not? I don't know what's happened here. Great, good. Live demo, fun. All right, let's start RStudio again. Okay, let's see if I get a terminal now. Great, okay. So I have an application. This is exactly what I've sent over to Git, and this represents the state of my production application at this point. So if I wanted to start a new branch for that repository, Git checkout branch, dev branch. Now I'm on the dev branch and I can make a change to the application. Like maybe I want to do something super simple, like update the title here. So right now it says Palmer Penguins, K-means clustering. Yep, that's what it says. And I want to change it to Kelly's Palmer Penguins, K-means clustering. I don't know why, but that's the change I want to make. And I want to send it to this new branch I've called dev branch. So git status, I made a change. Add change. And I'll push that to my new branch. And now when I go back to connect, I want to create a new application that represents the dev branch here so I can compare between the two. So again, I want that same Git repository, so I'll pull that in here. I'll select a branch. So now I want the dev branch. Next, and this will be dev application. I'll hit deploy, and this should go pretty fast because, yep, I already have it. Package cache is set up. And now I have my change, Kelly's Palmer Penguins K-means cluster. So now I have 2 applications, and they represent the test location for this application and the prod location. So if I were to then take the change that I have on dev branch, let's see, one branch, dev branch, and I want to pull request that into the main branch. To do that, create a pull request that gets validated. They do some user acceptance testing. Everybody agrees, yeah, the title should be changed. I can merge this in to the main branch. I'll delete it here. And now when I go back to RStudio Connect will, within 15 minutes, reach out to the repository to pull and discover that change. But since we don't have 15 minutes to sit around here, we'll just hit the Update Now button. It'll go and look for that change, find it, and then relaunch the application with the change. And now my test location and my prod location are in sync. So that's the basics of sort of managing code promotion between locations on a single server. Of course, if you had actual like discrete different servers for doing that too, the process would basically be the same for Git-backed publishing. I could set up a Git-backed location on one server called test and one on prod, and then I could manage the branches and the PR requests and merging externally in my Git-based system, and that would just be reflected on each of the servers. Push button deployment can essentially work the same way as long as you're careful to make sure that you're pushing to the correct content location. So you can set up actually within the same application to push to 2 different locations. Right now, this is set up just to push to a single location on my sales demo server. But if I wanted to add a second location, I could do the same set of steps. So I'll set up a new app and publish to that same sales demo server. And then once that deployment takes place, I'll have another location registered here in the publishing UI dropdown. But I have to wait for that to go through the whole deployment process. So that's code promotion. This is what I just showed. I have a development environment on my local machine running RStudio, and I've published to 2 different content locations on the same Connect server. All of these things are backed by package environments that I've set up to match through RStudio Package Manager. And if I had discrete server environments, I could do exactly the same thing. And all of these things involve a third product called Package Manager, which we haven't talked about yet. So that's I think the next section here. Oh, my deployment success. Great. Is to talk about the importance of environment management strategies. I have I think 2 more sections to go through for configuration basics, but we're running into the last hour of time now, so I'm going to try and run through these pretty quickly so that we have time to go over the last section, which is talking about what's next for RStudio Connect. You'll have all of these slides so you can go through the section that I definitely won't get to now, called admin experience here, starting on slide 45. And that takes you through sort of some of the experiential tools that RStudio admins have at their disposal to audit and manage parts of the server, including licenses, users, groups, and using the server API to answer questions about what's happening on your server and how to get information about that. All right, so back to environment management strategy, since this is very important. Right off the bat, we always like to acknowledge that environment management takes work, and it requires making decisions about what you want to happen and how you want your publishers to interact with their own projects, but it's important as a publisher to want these things for yourself for reproducibility and for ease of deployments, and for admins to be able to control the safety of your environments and understand what packages and things exist in the environment that you manage. So some of the cases where the reward is worth the effort is when, as a publisher, you're working on a long-term project and you want to safely upgrade packages and keep that reproducibility without breaking your existing code. Also for a publisher, when you and your team need to collaborate on the same project using a common source of truth. As an admin, if you need to validate and control the packages that your users are using. And as a publisher or an admin, to manage deployments when you're ready to take a data product, a content item into production, like a Shiny application or a document or an API. Deploying things from one environment to another requires an environment management strategy. Another area of importance specific to Connect is the use of private packages in content deployment. So something that may or may not be in use at your own organization is publishers or data scientists creating groups of functionality that they've packaged up and have internally distributed throughout the organization, which could result in some content items having packages that aren't coming from CRAN or some public source. So organizations with this being a case might find it useful to host their own package repository. This can be done either through open source methods or RStudio package manager, but it allows you to share and version those internal packages, access and govern packages from external sources, including public sources, and then audit package use overall. So there are a lot of benefits from the admin perspective to setting up your own internal package repository. Since I'm talking to folks in the R and pharma space, I know that validated environment management is a top concern. So the workbook itself has some recommended exercises and links to read through for considerations specific to validated environments. I recommend that you read through these so that you can answer questions like, can you recreate your environment? Can you trust the things that are in your environment? Do you know what a validated environment strategy looks like? And do you know how to set up an internal package repository? That set of workbook resources also takes you through what we call the reproducibility and environment strategy map. The idea here is that before you select a strategy, you go through and think about these two questions. Who is responsible for managing environments inside of your organization? And how open does that environment need to be? The scenarios that go along this axis in green represent the scenarios that are good environment strategies, either safe or good in the way that they are usable to publishers or data scientists. Anytime you move out into the red areas, there are some different downsides or problematic use cases that come with moving away from any of the green areas. So the green represents you are in either fairly locked down access in your environment to packages, and the person responsible for reproducing the environment is the admin. So in the validated scenario, admins test and approve a subset of packages coming from CRAN. In a shared baseline environment, it's a little bit more open. publishers can take more responsibility for managing their environment. So all or most of CRAN is available, although that can be controlled. It's linked to versions of R, and those versions of R are tied to system libraries that are shared across publishers. In the snapshot and restore scenario, you have kind of like the most open access to packages and the environments. Your user or the system itself is responsible for recording what those packages are and on a per project basis, and the user or publisher is responsible for taking that action to capture that information and then using it to restore the environment. When you move off of this green line, as I mentioned, you kind of get into these nastier scenarios where things aren't as functional inside of your organization. Examples of that are like a ticket system where you're very locked down, but the admin is responsible for everything, and all of your users have to come to you to request packages on a case-by-case basis. So you're always finding yourself needing to add things to your server, and that can be very tedious. The Wild West scenario is what most our users coming from academia are most used to. They're only working on their individual machines. They don't think about reproducibility very much. They're just acting in the moment, solving problems in real time. They're using packages that come off of the internet and basically doing whatever they need to do in the moment to answer the questions and do their discovery work. And that can pose challenges around reproducibility and the safety of your environment when you're not in control and you don't know exactly where packages are coming from or where people are getting them or who's using what at what time. The blocked scenario here down at this end represents a scenario where you have basically said no package access is allowed at all. You haven't thought it through and you're not willing to make any concessions on that. And so your end users, your publishers, start working around you to bring in packages through the back door to solve their own problems and to do the work that they need to do. And that obviously is not great for anyone. When you have users working around your policies and systems and expectations, that is bad for your environment management altogether, your security, but it's a common scenario that happens when users don't have access to the packages and systems that they need. All right, that is all I'm going to say about package management and environment management strategies for now. There are more exercises and more reading to do, like I mentioned in the workbook. Let me see if there are any questions here. This one is a question about database connections. So I'll let somebody try to answer that in the chat and move on to the next section. But if we have time at the end and this doesn't get answered, I'll circle back to it. The final section that I want to cover with regards to basics configuration and how to set up Connect in a really customized way is to talk about some new functionality that we introduced over the summer for custom branding. So this would be a set of functionality commonly known as white labeling a product. We've called it custom branding because it involves a number of different customizations. The first of which is that you can now replace the RStudio logo on the Connect dashboard with a logo of your choosing, if you so choose. You could also do things like direct login users to a certain landing page of your choice when they enter Connect. So route them away from the traditional entry point to the content dashboard. You can generate custom content landing pages in R code with a package called Connect Widgets, which is most commonly used by publishers. So if you're generating or needing to generate landing pages for the purpose of routing logged in users to certain locations based on whatever criteria you choose, it's best to work with a data scientist or a publisher or an R user to build out a landing page using that Connect Widgets package. You can customize what anonymous and logged out users see when they first visit your server. You can control certain email settings, such as the sender display name, the from address, sender address headers, and subject prefix. And you can choose to hide the documentation tab, this tab here, from all the viewers if you so choose. So here are places, some of the places where some of these branding configuration settings would appear. Again, these are configuration settings, so they have to be set up in that Go configuration file. So you would be needing to bring your images onto the server itself, provide them in that configuration file. They need to be accessible there. This one is for the favicon. The branding display name is places that mention RStudio Connect in text throughout the product. So this is just one of those locations, and this will be used fairly widely throughout the product with a couple exceptions that I'll mention. And then here's an area where the logo is quite visible. Some of those email customization settings I mentioned are seen here in this diagram. Setting the email subject prefix is one of the things that I mentioned in the workbook, is something that your publishers might be interested in changing. The email display name can be changed, branding logo again, and then with branding enabled, this will be changed to powered by RStudio Connect instead of saying RStudio Connect in the footer there. You could do some customization around landing pages, as I mentioned. One of the workbook exercises prompts you to update the server landing directory to set up a custom landing page for the logged out or anonymous users that they'll see on this login page. I was gonna demo that on the server that we stood up together, but I will skip that for timing purposes. But there is a workbook exercise, like I mentioned, around that. You can take a look at it yourself. These other types of landing pages for the logged in user, I mentioned also, they're controlled by a server route redirect setting, and the server dashboard path is also important to set when you have adjusted route redirect. This takes you to a YouTube video of me giving a demo of some of that Connect Widgets functionality for setting up a landing page or a content showcase based on the Connect Widgets package. So I'll let you watch that at your leisure as well. The unsupported customizations as of today, these are things that you cannot change, unfortunately, are the color palette of the Connect dashboard. I know that's been requested, but this is the color palette you get. You can't change any of the existing colors, even though you can apply your own logos now. Hiding tags from viewers is not supported. Removal of any footer text that says powered by RStudio Connect is not supported, and you cannot remove any of the RStudio copyright information throughout the product. We also have some special configuration considerations, for consultancies or in scenarios where you have a bunch of external users coming to the product. Some things that you might want to consider are, of course, branding and landing page customizations. You might want to set up some additional user isolation, like an authorization setting called viewers can only see themselves and server hide email addresses. They're two different methods or levels of user isolation that we offer. You can also restrict certain viewer functionality. So if you set server viewer kiosk to true, users with a viewer role aren't allowed to submit permission requests for content access or request any elevated role privileges at all. So they're pretty locked down as to what they can do or request access to on the server. If you need multiple authentication providers, that's not something that we support standard out of the box on Connect, but you can set up, if you wanted to, some sort of federated authentication access. So in that scenario, RStudio Connect will authenticate against an external identity provider like normal, usually something like SAML. And then that provider federates identity management to several different authentication providers. So this is sort of the diagram of what that looks like. The things that are in the RStudio support SLA are like this portion. The things that are not are this portion. And finally, I wanted to cover a couple of the golden rules. These are sort of Kelly's golden rules. Like David might have his own golden rules. The solutions engineering team or sales team might have their rules for Connect configuration. But here are the things that I think are sort of the most important to consider when you are finalizing a Connect configuration. Number one, this can cause problems with configurations and is sort of the thing that we check for first when we are looking at a support diagnostics bundle is server address set within your configuration. If you use that setup assistant tool, that it will force you to do this. But if you are manually writing out the configuration or you're setting things up out of the box and you don't use setup assistant, you have to take an extra step to fill in that field. So it's really useful to use the setup assistant because it forces you to take that step and can prevent some strange behavior or server errors within the product going forward. You should always test your email server configuration. Send a test email like I showed in using the dashboard UI. Email servers are really useful to publishers. If you don't configure it on your server, you should have that conversation with your end users as to why, because it removes a bunch of really useful functionality from Connect if you don't set that up. You should maintain an open dialogue with your publisher users. Always leverage your resources at RStudio through customer success and sales to have those conversations if necessary, but endeavor to maintain that open dialogue so that they know who to come to when they have issues and that you know who to reach out to when you have concerns. Before you start publishing content, make sure you have made an informed decision about your authentication provider. If you have to change that after content has already been published to the server, it requires a migration of those content items. And that can be time intensive to go through. So it's best to make a really informed decision up front. And you can use that authentication decision matrix that I shared earlier on in the deck to go through and think of like top level, what should we be considering and what could affect our decision between two different authentication provider types if we have both options. You also want to make an informed decision about your package repository. If you change those repository configurations in your configuration file, you may need to rebuild your package cache. And depending on the amount of content that you have on your server, that could take some time and cause some end user disruptions, like they would need to wait for content to rebuild when they visited it for the first time. So it's not the end of the world, but it's nice to have a strategy for what your environment management is going to be and where you're getting your packages. And if you're going to set up an internal repository and have that available, that you've done so ahead of time. And that's the final big golden rule is life on Connect and in general is better with package manager or some sort of internal repository, open source or otherwise. So please do consider having that conversation or making that available as part of your configuration before you give your server over to users. All right. That brings me to the last half hour. I'm not going to take another break. We're going to go straight into it. David, our other David, I've invited 2 Davids to the call. Connect Engineering David, are you here already?
Hey, I'm here.
Yay. Okay, I'm gonna kick this section off and then and then throw it over to you. So this last section, we're going to cover some of the new things, some investments that we've been making on the engineering side for Connect and what our roadmap looks like going into 2022. So real quickly, I want to talk about, the vision, like I've been saying throughout this training, is that we want data scientists to be able to own their publication, execution, management, and distribution of their own work in a safe and sophisticated manner that's fully sanctioned by you, the IT admin. So in order to accomplish that and add some new functionality to Connect over the short term and into the future, our sort of strategic level goals are to increase the types of content that we make available to share. So the content type support, improve content discovery and management on the server, and facilitate different types of production deployments. This last month in October, we introduced our first BI integration with Tableau through Tableau Analytic Extension support. In early 2022, we're going to be allowing administrators to enable remote content execution on Kubernetes. Going from there, our goals into 2022 will probably look like allowing publishers to drive viewer engagement of their work through a number of methods, allowing publishers to manage different sophisticated types of process automation workflows on Connect, and increasing feature parity for Python users. Things relevant to the admin might be an extension of some of our cloud native capabilities, or integrations and configurations, installations, and improvements to the Docker-friendly components of our installation process. I'm going to kick it over to David, who's going to preview that Kubernetes backend work that we've been working on. So I'm going to stop sharing and let him talk about that.
That's you. Just give me 2 seconds here.
Thank you. I'm just kidding. My name is David Kegley. I'm on the Connect engineering team. So my team has been working on remote content execution.
Should be good.
Thank you. Cool. Am I sharing the right screen?
Local content execution.
That's the one.
Awesome.
All right, cool. So first, I just want to provide a quick summary of kind of how Connect works today in a little bit more technical detail, and then I'll go into remote content execution and what that means for Connect once that feature gets released, hopefully in a near release. So the way Connect currently executes your content, it's executing on the same host as the Connect server. So the same operating system that's running Connect server is also executing your content. The content itself is sandboxed at the operating system level using system calls and operating system sandboxing. But what that means is there's some side effects to that approach. If you need to scale your content, if you need to give a particular piece of content more memory so that it can execute, or some additional CPU cores, it also means you have to scale your underlying host that's running Connect. Sometimes this isn't a big deal, but it can mean that if you have an existing infrastructure already set up, you need to do a migration to a bigger host. Sometimes that's really easy. Sometimes it's a little bit more involved. but it is a limitation of the current architecture that we have for Connect. Another side effect is that system dependencies and R and Python versions are global. So content that's executing in this way is they're gonna share system dependencies. And again, generally that's okay. But the new approach that we are moving toward with remote content execution will eliminate some of those commingling of system dependencies. So you can have multiple versions of GDAL if you need it, using different container images. It's also worth noting that there's nothing wrong with continuing to do that, to use Connect this way. It's how Connect was designed to work since the beginning. But as cloud native technologies become a lot more prevalent for our customers, it's important that RStudio makes an effort to remain a good citizen when it comes to those new technologies and using Connect in the cloud. So that brings us to remote content execution. So before I dive too deep here, can we do a quick audience poll? I'm just curious who would describe themselves as expert Kubernetes users or never used Kubernetes, never heard of it. Can we get a 1 to 3 in the chat if you've never used Kubernetes or use it very rarely, and then 3 if you're a Kubernetes power user. Cool. Okay. Lots of 1s, couple 2s, couple 3s. That's okay. That's exactly what I expected. Thank you for the feedback. It's always useful to know who you're talking to in your audience. I don't want to bore people by providing too many technical details. So just to give a quick overview of Kubernetes and why this is relevant. Kubernetes is a container orchestration platform that manages the lifecycle of containerized applications. So for the purposes of RStudio Connect, you can think of Kubernetes as a cluster of compute resources that you can use to execute your content. So with remote execution enabled, Connect, instead of executing content on the same operating system that's running Connect, will actually send your content over to a Kubernetes cluster and use the resources in that cluster to execute your content. And what that means is your content is executing in an isolated container, totally separate from the host that's running Connect. So you can make use of all the isolation and the resources that come with the Kubernetes cluster. A lot of times it's also beneficial if your organization already has an IT organization within it that is managing that Kubernetes cluster. A lot of times you can share what already exists with Kubernetes. So it can lessen the burden of administering Connect. Again, an additional benefit is if you need to scale content execution, you just ask for more resources from Kubernetes. Kubernetes handles the scheduling and making sure that a given piece of content has the resources like CPU and memory that it needs. System dependencies and R and Python versions are defined for each piece of content separately. So they're no longer shared across pieces of content. So there are a couple different installation options that come with administering Connect with remote content execution enabled. So the first option is the one that RStudio is recommending. We've put a lot of effort from the beginning into the automation of installing RStudio Connect with Helm. And Helm is a command line application for installing applications on Kubernetes. So you can define your configuration for Helm, define your Connect configuration, and then go and force that deployment on Kubernetes. And what that means is, in addition to your content executing on Kubernetes, we also recommend that Connect itself, the Connect server, is executing on the same Kubernetes cluster. The reason for that is it really simplifies the networking quite a bit. You don't have to go outside of Kubernetes to go back to connect, and it really simplifies the administration burden quite a bit, and it automates your deployments, and it's much easier to configure. There's nothing wrong with running Connect outside of Kubernetes. You can do that as well if that's what you prefer, but if you go that approach, you won't be able to use Helm. And that it means that there's going to be some complex configuration and maybe some more in-depth Kubernetes knowledge that would be required in order to get that set up and working in the first place. So we definitely recommend that first approach, which is to use Helm. And I've linked down here at the bottom the Helm charts that RStudio have developed are open source. So if you want to go take a look at those, feel free. So the other thing I want to point out here is that because each of these pieces of content is using its own image, that means that there's a bunch of different image combinations that you might use. And RStudio builds a default set of images that you can use to execute your content. So we're building Docker images that have common versions of R and Python installed on them already. And you can use those for your base images. They come configured out of the box if you're using this first option, and are easy to configure if you're using the second option as well. So you can still make use of them. But if those default images that we're shipping don't work for you, or you need to customize those images in some way, that's okay too. We're going to provide that ability as well. So if you have custom requirements for your content, so let's say a piece of content requires a really specific system library, or a specific version of a specific library, you can build off of our content base images, install those additional libraries on your Docker image, build the Docker image, and push it up to a public or private registry. And at that point, all you would need to do is tell Connect where that image lives. So you'll see here on the right side is an example of what this configuration file would look like. The only things required are providing a name. So in this case, we've defined the RStudio repository has an image called content base, and we wanted to use the version that has R 4.1.0 installed and Python 3.9.2 installed. And it's a Bionic base image. And then we've defined the installation paths for R and Python within that image. And the same way that Connect works today, it'll interrogate those configured images for you. And depending on the requirements of your content, we'll select one of those images and use that to execute your content. So for the publisher, there's no additional work. Everything should continue to work exactly the way that it always has in Connect. And again, linked down here at the bottom is the repository that contains the base images that come defaulted when you enable remote content execution. So I think that's everything that I wanted to cover. I apologize. I went through that a little bit quickly, but are there questions, anything that I can answer related to remote content execution? If not, then I will hand it back over to Kelly.
Brings us to the end here. Am I sharing the right thing again? I think so. So the last piece that we have is relevant to what David just demoed for us, and that is we'd like to start getting some feedback and some early adopters on this new execution model for Connect. So this is something that you've been waiting a long time for, getting to see the launcher product, if you're familiar with the RStudio Workbench inside of Connect as well. We're now looking to take applications for our beta program. So I'm going to, if I can find the chat again in Zoom. Why does it always disappear? Here we go. All right, so the sign up, form if you are interested in being one of our first early adopters into Off-Host Execution for Connect is there. Please feel free to sign up and we will start reaching out to folks over the next couple weeks. We're envisioning that this beta period will sort of run from December until early in 2022 when we make the general availability announcement for this functionality. Currently, what you will be able to install for beta program will not have full feature parity for what's available in RStudio Connect through local execution today, but it is fairly close and has all of the necessary publishing methodologies and basically everything a publisher would expect to find inside of Connect. We do ask that you meet a couple of requirements if you'd like to sign up for beta. You need to have a Kubernetes cluster where you have full cluster admin privileges. You need to be available. You need to be able to stand up a Postgres database that meets Connect's requirements and an NFS server that meets the shared storage requirements for Connect HA environments. We also really prefer if you are willing to provide active feedback on the installation and configuration process for us. And if you are able to set up a time for us to meet with your publisher users to have them provide feedback for what their experience is like using Connect in this launcher or off-host execution mode, that would also be ideal. So feel free to sign up using that form if you'd like. And that brings us to the end of the workshop. So let me go back to the chat and see if there are any other questions. With remote content, is it possible to control when the content is scaled in the Kubernetes cluster via UI like the controls of current processes? Yes. David, are you still on? Do you want to demo what it looks like in Connect today running on Kubernetes?
I don't have everything set up that I would need to do a demo right now. Sorry about that.
Okay. No worries.
But to answer the question, yes, the same way you would control content runtimes in the Connect UI is the same way you would do that with remote content execution enabled.
Happy to take any other questions on this or anything else. Ed asks, is there an integration with Slurm? No. We have started with Kubernetes, and that's all that's available today.
Hey, Kelly, David, it's Satish from Jensen. I had a quick question about the manual setup instead of using Helm. The question that I have is, if we have RStudio Workbench running with an EKS cluster and all of these security/code requirements met, how difficult would it be or how easy will it be to deploy RConnect using manual setup outside of Kubernetes?
So if you already have Workbench installed, you're probably most of the way there already. On the back end, RStudio Connect and Workbench are both using the job launcher to submit jobs to Kubernetes. So the manual configurations that I was referring to are primarily about setting up role-based access control in Kubernetes, which are probably already set up for Workbench, and setting up an authentication token that allows Connect to send jobs to Kubernetes when they're available. So primarily it's setting up some resources in Kubernetes that allows Connect to connect to the Kubernetes API and submit jobs.
Cool, David. That will work well. For reasons that I don't want to go into, we might want to set up the RConnect as a standalone instance as opposed to deploying it inside Kubernetes. We use EKS, but that's a layer on top of Kubernetes.
Gotcha. Yeah. That should continue to work just fine. And the first option is nice because Helm automates it for you. But like I said, it's definitely not a requirement. And if you have some Kubernetes experience, the second option will be just fine. There's really no, it's not that much of a burden to manually do those configurations. It just requires a little bit of Kubernetes knowledge.
Fair enough. Thank you. I'm happy to see this. This is the first time I'm seeing something in writing and in a formal presentation. I'm excited.
Cool.
I think there's a few more questions. You see those, Kelly? Would help if I read them.
Kyle asks, is there plans to allow deployment of Docker images to RStudio Connect, or does that defeat the purpose of Connect? So I think like this off-host execution is sort of our answer to the mental model behind that question, I believe. Although Kyle, if you want to ask a more specific question, we can try to get to the bottom of what use case you're thinking of there. Ed, I sent you a link to the Docker or RStudio products if you haven't had access to those before. Cool.
All right.
All right.
Any
Yeah, I'm
other
happy
questions?
to sit on for another couple minutes if anybody else has final questions. If we want to stop recording in case people want to come off mute and ask things that aren't on the recording, that's fine. I have another 9 minutes before my next meeting, so happy to spend the time here. We could end it.
Sounds good. Let's give them a minute or so to see if any questions come in. If you want to go off a mute, you're welcome to. It is a recording. If you'd like to post them in the chat box, that's fine too. Feel free to ask David or Kelly here, or the other David, some questions. Sure, for sure. All right. Going once, going twice. Any questions? Don't see anything. All right, I'm going to give everybody back their afternoon, morning, or evening, wherever you are in this world. Thank you for coming. And tomorrow's R and Pharma officially day one. We're going to have Rich kicking it off with a keynote. We've got some feature talks from Roche. We've got a validation workshop to end the day. So come on out tomorrow. We'll see you there. And yeah,